He didn't hear me over the scream of the chainsaw. Or maybe he did. Either way, the next 14 seconds were the last normal moment I'd have for the next 18 months. Because Brad thought he was cutting through a tree. What he didn't know, he was cutting through the one piece of land that would eventually destroy his life, his fortune, and everything he thought he understood about power. My name is Marcus Morgan, and this is the story of how one man's chainsaw became his own guillotine. It was 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when the sound hit me like a physical blow. I dropped my coffee mug, my grandmother's china, the one with tiny roses that had survived 3 generations of Morgan family breakfasts, and watched it shatter on the kitchen floor. But I barely noticed the mess, because outside my window, something impossible was happening. Brad Hutchinson, tech millionaire, Instagram influencer, and the worst neighbor in the 200-year history of Hawthorne Drive, was standing in $400 designer sneakers, wielding a chainsaw like he was born to destroy beautiful things. And he was murdering the Morgan family oak. Not just any tree. The tree. The one my great-great-grandfather planted in 1823 when he first claimed this land. The tree that had watched over 6 generations of my family. The tree that had survived storms, droughts, and 2 centuries of progress trying to pave over everything green and beautiful. The tree that made Brad Hutchinson about to become the biggest mistake of his very privileged life. I didn't shout. I didn't run outside screaming. Instead, I did something that would haunt Brad's nightmares for years to come. I smiled, and I took a photo. You see, what Brad didn't know, what he couldn't have known, because people like him never bother to learn about the places they invade, is that the Morgan family oak wasn't just protected by sentiment. It was protected by law. Federal law. The kind of law that sends rich boys to prison. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am, because in 18 months, that's going to matter more than Brad ever imagined. My name is Marcus Morgan, and I'm the 6th generation of my family to live on Hawthorne Drive. We didn't move here. We built here. My great-great-grandfather surveyed this land when it was still frontier. My great-grandfather helped incorporate the town. My grandfather wrote the first zoning laws. My father served on the city council for 37 years. And me, I'm a retired city planner turned environmental consultant. The kind of man who doesn't just know every municipal code. I helped write half of them. At 45, I've spent my entire adult life protecting places like this from people like Brad. The Morgan family has deep roots in this community, deeper than Brad would ever understand. When you've been somewhere for 2 centuries, you don't just live in a place, you are the place. Brad was everything our family had spent generations keeping out. Fast money, no respect, and the kind of arrogance that thinks a checkbook can rewrite history. He'd bought Mrs. Kinney's house 11 months ago for triple what she'd paid, then immediately started treating our neighborhood like his personal playground. Pool parties that shook windows 3 blocks away, construction crews working at all hours, Instagram drone shots of his private paradise in progress. But the tree? The tree was where I drew the line. That tree had been more than wood and leaves to my family. It was where my great-grandmother took her wedding photos in 1892, where my grandfather proposed to my grandmother in 1943, 3 days before shipping out to Normandy, where my father taught me to climb, where I taught my daughter, where my wife and I scattered our son's ashes after we lost him to leukemia when he was 7. Brad had taken a chainsaw to 2 centuries of Morgan family memory, and I was going to take everything from him in return. But first, I had to let him think he was winning. Over the next 3 months, I watched Brad build his empire of violations. Every weekend brought new construction, new parties, new reasons for the neighbors to hate him. But I didn't complain. I didn't call the city. I didn't do any of the things a normal person would do when their neighbor was systematically destroying the neighborhood. Instead, I documented everything. Because here's what 20 years in city planning teaches you. 1 violation gets you a warning. A pattern of violations gets you destroyed. And Brad was giving me the most beautiful pattern I'd ever seen. The pool that violated setback requirements by 14 feet. The fence that exceeded height restrictions by 18 inches. The gazebo that was actually an unpermitted party platform with commercial-grade sound equipment. The driveway expansion that encroached on city property. The drainage system that diverted water illegally onto neighboring lots. Each violation timestamped, each one photographed, each one cross-referenced with the relevant municipal codes. But Brad wasn't content to just break the law quietly. He had to make it personal. The first threat came on a Thursday evening in October. I was checking my mail when Brad's Tesla pulled up behind me, music thumping loud enough to rattle my windows. "Hey, Marcus," he called out, not bothering to turn down the volume. "Heard you've been asking questions about my renovations." I looked at him calmly. "Just curious about your permit situation." His smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "You know, neighbor disputes can get really expensive really fast. Legal fees, property damage claims, harassment suits, stuff like that." "Is that a threat, Brad?" "It's friendly advice from someone who can afford better lawyers than you can." He drove away, bass still pounding, leaving me standing in a cloud of exhaust and the faint scent of expensive cologne. That night, I opened a new file on my computer. I labeled it Hutchinson Criminal Evidence. Keyboard typing, mouse. 2 weeks after Brad's not-so-subtle intimidation attempt, something strange started happening. I began finding things. First, it was a manila envelope slipped under my door. No return address, no signature. Just photographs of Brad's construction crew dumping concrete waste in the storm drain behind his house. Professional quality photos taken with expensive equipment showing clear violations of environmental protection laws. Then came a second envelope. Building permits for properties in 3 different states, all under Brad's name. All for work that looked suspiciously similar to what he was doing here. All filed and then mysteriously withdrawn before completion. The third envelope contained something that made my blood run cold. Bank records showing Brad had purchased not just Mrs. Kinney's house, but options on 4 other properties on our block. Someone else was watching Brad. Someone with resources, connections, and a very professional approach to gathering evidence. But who? The answer came on a rain-soaked Thursday evening in November. I was reviewing the latest batch of anonymous evidence when I heard a soft knock on my door. Not the aggressive pounding Brad favored, but the gentle tap of someone who understood proper etiquette. I opened the door to find a woman in her 70s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, holding an umbrella in one hand and a briefcase in the other. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "my name is Eleanor Vasquez. I live 3 houses down, and I believe we have a common problem." She held up a photograph that made my heart stop. It was Brad, standing next to my family's oak tree, holding a chainsaw and grinning at the camera. But this wasn't the photo I'd taken the morning he cut it down. This photo was taken 3 days earlier. He'd planned it. "Mrs. Vasquez," I said, stepping aside to let her in, "I think we need to talk." Eleanor Vasquez wasn't just a concerned neighbor. She was a weapon. 47 years married to a federal prosecutor, 30 years as a paralegal specializing in environmental law. And for the past 6 months, she'd been building a case against Brad that would make my documentation look like a child's scrapbook. "I've been watching him since the day he moved in," she told me, spreading files across my kitchen table. "Men like Hutchinson follow patterns. They can't help themselves." She was right. The evidence she'd compiled was staggering. Brad wasn't just some tech bro with more money than sense. He was running a sophisticated real estate fraud operation across multiple states. Buy properties with cash, make illegal improvements to inflate value, sell quickly before anyone caught the violations, then move on to the next market. "He's done this 17 times in the last 4 years, Eleanor explained, showing me a spreadsheet that looked like it belonged in a federal courtroom, made approximately $8.3 million in profit from fraudulent property sales. "But why here? Why our neighborhood?" Eleanor's smile was sharp as winter wind. "Because Hawthorne Drive has something his previous targets didn't have. History, prestige, and trees old enough to be legally protected." She pulled out another document that made my hands shake. "Marcus, your family tree isn't just protected by city ordinance. In 1987, it was designated as part of a federal environmental preservation zone. Cutting it down isn't just a municipal violation. I stared at the paper. What is it? Criminal destruction of federally protected environmental resources. That's a felony, Marcus. Federal prison time. But Eleanor wasn't finished. And there's something else. Something I don't think even Brad knows yet. She pulled out a survey map from 1823, the original land grant when my great-great-grandfather first claimed this territory. Marcus, look at your property line. Really look at it. I studied the map, comparing it to modern surveys. Something was wrong. The boundaries didn't match. Mrs. Vasquez, what am I looking at? A surveying error that's been on the books for 150 years. Brad's house, the pool, the gazebo, that illegal fence. She traced her finger along the property line. Half of it is built on land that still legally belongs to your family. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First, to the city planning office, where my former colleague Joan still worked. Joan, I need to file a federal environmental violation report. Second, to the EPA regional office. I'd like to report criminal destruction of protected environmental resources. Third, to my lawyer, not just any lawyer, but Patricia Morgan Walsh, my cousin, who happened to specialize in federal environmental crime prosecution. By noon, the wheels were in motion. But Brad wasn't going down without a fight. That evening, he struck back. I came home to find a police car in my driveway and Officer Martinez looking uncomfortable on my front porch. Mr. Morgan, I need to ask you some questions about a harassment complaint. What kind of complaint? Your neighbor, Mr. Hutchinson, says you've been trespassing on his property, taking unauthorized photographs, and making threats about legal action. I looked at the officer calmly. Did he show you any evidence of these accusations? Well, no, sir, but Officer Martinez, I've lived on this street for 23 years. My family has been here for 2 centuries. If you'd like to see my evidence of Mr. Hutchinson's actual criminal activity, I have quite a bit of it. The harassment complaint disappeared by morning. But Brad's next move was more subtle. 3 days later, I discovered Brad had been busy. He'd gone door to door through the neighborhood, charming his way into living rooms with expensive wine and sob stories about property disputes with difficult neighbors. He painted himself as the victim of an old family trying to control the neighborhood through intimidation and legal bullying. Some neighbors bought it. The Hendersons, 2 houses down, suddenly wouldn't make eye contact when I walked by. The Patels across the street mentioned, maybe we should let people make their own choices about their property. Even Mrs. Chen, who'd lived here for 30 years, seemed to think I was being a bit harsh. For the first time since this war began, I felt isolated. Brad was good at this, better than I'd expected. But he made one crucial mistake. He tried to charm Eleanor. The encounter happened at the grocery store. Brad approached Eleanor with his practiced smile and his expensive casual outfit, ready to deploy the same manipulation that had worked on the other neighbors. Mrs. Vasquez, right? I'm Brad, your neighbor. I was hoping we could talk about this situation with Marcus. I think there might be some misunderstandings. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled the kind of smile that should have made Brad run. Oh, Mr. Hutchinson, I'm so glad we're finally meeting face to face. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. I'm Eleanor Vasquez, retired chief paralegal for the Federal Environmental Crimes Division, and I've been looking forward to having a conversation with you for quite some time. Brad's face went white. You see, Eleanor continued, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from 40 years of putting criminals behind bars, I've been building a case against you since the day you moved in. Would you like to know how many federal felonies I've documented? Brad stammered something about lawyers and misunderstandings and walked away so fast he left his shopping cart in the middle of the produce section. That night, Eleanor called me. Marcus, we need to accelerate our timeline. I think our friend is about to run. Eleanor was right. Brad was getting ready to bolt. Over the next week, neighbors reported seeing moving trucks making late-night visits to his house. His Instagram posts suddenly stopped. The pool parties ended abruptly. But we were ready. The federal investigation had been building quietly for months. EPA agents, FBI financial crimes investigators, and local law enforcement had been coordinating a response that would close every possible escape route. The trap was set. We just needed Brad to spring it. On a cold Tuesday morning in December, I watched from my kitchen window as Brad loaded the last of his designer furniture into a U-Haul truck. His Tesla was packed with suitcases. He was dressed like someone heading to the airport. He thought he was going to disappear the same way he'd left his previous victims, quietly, in the night, with a wallet full of cash and no forwarding address. At 6:47 a.m., his U-Haul pulled out of the driveway. At 6:52 a.m., 3 black SUVs blocked both ends of Hawthorne Drive. I grabbed my coffee and stepped onto my front porch to watch. FBI agents surrounded the U-Haul. EPA investigators cordoned off Brad's house. Local police redirected traffic. And there, in the middle of it all, was Brad Hutchinson. Tech millionaire, Instagram influencer, and destroyer of trees, sitting on the curb in handcuffs, looking like he'd finally run out of other people's money to solve his problems. Eleanor appeared beside me, holding her own coffee mug. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, Marcus?" One of the finest I can remember. But the show wasn't over yet. The story broke that afternoon. Tech entrepreneur arrested in multi-state environmental fraud case. By evening, news trucks lined our street. By the end of the week, Brad's case had become a national story about wealthy criminals who thought they could buy their way out of environmental law. But the real reckoning came 3 months later, at Brad's federal sentencing hearing. The courthouse was packed. Victims from 4 states had come to watch Brad face justice. Environmental groups sent representatives. News cameras recorded every moment. I sat in the front row, wearing my best suit, the one I'd worn to my father's funeral, and my grandfather's before that. Eleanor sat beside me, holding a thick folder containing every piece of evidence we'd compiled. When the judge asked if anyone wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up. "Your Honor, my name is Marcus Morgan. My family has lived on Hawthorne Drive for 200 years. 6 generations of Morgans have called that place home." I looked directly at Brad, sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit that didn't match his usual aesthetic. The defendant didn't just cut down a tree. He tried to cut down history. He tried to erase the legacy my family built over 2 centuries because he thought money could rewrite the past. My voice grew stronger. But some roots grow deeper than others. Some things can't be bought, can't be destroyed, can't be erased by men who mistake wealth for worth. Brad wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your Honor, the Morgan family will outlast men like the defendant. We were here before him and will be here long after he's forgotten. But the law remembers everything." The judge sentenced Brad to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 10 years of probation and $3.7 million in restitution payments. As they led him away, Brad finally looked at me. I nodded once. Justice served. 6 months after Brad's sentencing, Eleanor and I stood in what used to be his backyard, watching 12 neighbors work together to plant new trees. The federal asset forfeiture had seized everything Brad owned, including the house next door. The EPA's environmental remediation required not just cleanup, but restoration, native trees, natural drainage, and removal of all the illegal construction. Eleanor had organized the neighborhood to bid on the property as a community cooperative. We bought it for $180,000, less than a third of what Brad had paid. But we didn't just restore it. We transformed it. The pool became a rainwater collection system, feeding a community garden. The party platform became a pavilion where neighbors actually gathered, for book clubs, children's birthday parties, and summer evening concerts where the loudest sound was acoustic guitar and laughter. The fence came down entirely, replaced with walking paths that connected our backyards into a shared green space. And in the center of it all, where Brad's gazebo once stood, we planted the crown jewel. A heritage oak sapling, grown from an acorn that had fallen from my family's original tree. The plaque beneath it read, "In memory of the Morgan family oak, 1823 to 2024. Some roots grow deeper than others. Some trees live forever." 2 years after Brad's sentencing, I found something unexpected in my mailbox. A letter, handwritten, postmarked from the federal correctional facility where Brad was serving his time. "Mr. Morgan, I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. My lawyer says I shouldn't write this letter, but I needed you to know something. I never understood about the tree, about your family, about what I was really taking when I cut it down. I thought it was just wood. I thought everything was just replaceable. I was wrong about a lot of things. I know saying sorry doesn't bring back what I destroyed. But I wanted you to know that every day in here, I think about that tree. And about how some things are more valuable than money. I hope the new trees grow tall. Brad Hutchinson. I read the letter twice, then walked outside to the little park that had grown where Brad's house once stood. Children were playing under the young oak tree, the same tree that would, in 80 years, shade their grandchildren. I folded Brad's letter and put it in my pocket. Some men learn, most don't. But sometimes, just sometimes, even the worst mistakes can plant seeds of wisdom, even if they bloom too late to matter. Today, 3 years after this story began, I sit on the bench under the new Morgan family oak, watching the sun set through branches that are already reaching toward the sky with the patient determination of things built to last. The tree is small now, barely tall enough to shade a child. But oak trees live for centuries. This one will outlive me, my daughter, her children, and their children after that. Brad Hutchinson destroyed one tree and thought he'd won. Instead, he planted 12. He tried to erase 2 centuries of history and ended up becoming a cautionary tale that will be told for generations. He brought money and lawyers and Instagram followers. I brought patience, planning, and the power of knowing that some things are more valuable than wealth. People ask me sometimes if I planned all of this. If I knew that documenting Brad's violations would lead to a federal investigation, a national news story, a neighborhood transformation, and a new definition of community justice. The truth is simpler and more complex than that. I didn't plan to destroy Brad Hutchinson. I planned to protect what mattered. But sometimes when you stand up for what's right, the universe has a way of making sure justice grows from the very ground where injustice tried to take root. The chainsaw that tried to erase history became the catalyst that ensured it would never be forgotten. That's not revenge. That's regeneration. And that's the most powerful force of all. He brought a chainsaw. I brought a century of law. One man tried to erase history. Instead, he became part of it. As a cautionary tale carved into a bench under 12 rising oaks, where children who don't yet know his name will play in the shade of trees he never meant to plant. Thanks for listening to this story of how deep roots and patient planning can move mountains, or in this case, remove them entirely. If you enjoyed this tale of justice growing slowly but surely, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments, what's the most patient victory you've ever witnessed?